And he's like, got that voice, you know, that anybody, you know, you hear that voice, and it's just like, it's Arnold. I was born on the 17th of November, 1944, in Neptune, New Jersey. And from the very first breath, the world seemed determined to let me know I wasn't what it had ordered. My mother, Julia, was already 40 years old. She had raised several children by then. She didn't want another one. Years later, she said it plainly, without softening the edges. I didn't want him, but I'm so proud of him. 4 words of rejection. 6 words of pride. I carried both of those sentences inside me my entire life. The rejection sat in my chest like a stone I could never quite spit out. The pride became the thing I tried to live up to, even when I didn't know how. My father was a different kind of contradiction. By day, he was a gentleman who owned a candy shop in Asbury Park. People liked him. Kids came in for sweets and left smiling. But when the drinking started at night, something shifted in the house. The air changed. I learned to read those signs the way children in certain kinds of homes always do, by the sound of the door, by the way his footsteps hit the floor, by the particular silence that settled just before the storm. Sometimes I hid in closets. Sometimes I ran next door to the neighbors and stayed until it was quiet again. Between 1,950 and 1,955, the police were called to our home at least 17 times. 17 times. I counted them later. The way you count the scars, you can still feel even when you can't see them anymore. I also carried something nobody could see. I was born with a rare genetic condition called Fairbanks disease. That's why I only grew to 4 feet 10 inches. But the height was almost beside the point. The disease attacked my joints, my hips, my knees, my back like a quiet thief that never stopped working. By the time I was in my 20s, the pain on any given day sat somewhere between a 6 and an 8 out of 10. Some days it was higher. Hollywood told me to stay quiet about it. Weakness was not marketable. So I kept quiet, I kept going. I learned how to walk into a room as if my body wasn't arguing with me every step of the way. In New York, I ended up sharing a $75 a month apartment with Michael Douglas. He was quiet about the fact that his father was Kirk Douglas. We ate canned beans more nights than I care to remember. One time we split our last $27 on headshots and walked them across the city by hand, knocking on doors, leaving envelopes, hoping someone would look. Michael booked some roles. I kept getting rejected. I parked cars. I stood motionless in a clothing store window for hours, pretending to be a mannequin so the owner would let me sleep in the back. For a stretch, I lived out of my old Volkswagen Beetle. I showered at the YMCA. I kept that story private for decades because the shame of it still sat close to the surface. Hollywood told me repeatedly to change. One studio offered me the equivalent of nearly $1 million in today's money if I would agree to surgery to reshape my face to become something more comfortable for mainstream audiences. I said no. I took the contract down to the beach, built a small fire, and burned it while the waves rolled in. I looked at the casting director who had pushed me and said, I'd rather be a first-rate version of myself than a second-rate version of someone else. I meant it completely. I still do. By 1970, I was 26 years old. I had been rejected more times than I could count. I was carrying a body that hurt in ways I couldn't explain to most people. I had survived a childhood that would have broken plenty of men before they ever got started. I was still standing, but I had not yet, not in the way that reaches all the way down, been truly seen by another person. That was about to change on the 17th of January, 1970. It was one night only, a small off-Broadway play called The Shrinking Bride. Not a landmark production, not the kind of thing that ends up in theater history books. Just a modest show in a modest venue in New York City. Rhea Perlman had gone to see a friend who was in the cast. That was the only reason she was there. She was 22 years old, born and raised in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, the daughter of a Polish immigrant who worked in the toy business. She had studied drama at Hunter College, graduated in 1968, and had been waitressing at the Rainbow Room in Rockefeller Center while auditioning for whatever she could find. Sharp, funny, the kind of person who fills a room without needing to raise her voice. She sat down to watch her friend perform, and then she saw me. There was a stocky man on that stage, not tall, not the kind of face that gets you cast as the Hollywood leading man, and yet he was commanding that room completely. Something in the way I moved, the way I timed every line, the way I existed inside my own gravitational field made Rhea Perlman forget entirely why she had come. When the show ended, she asked around, did he have a girlfriend? No. She did not wait for a formal introduction. I had to meet him immediately, she would say years later, still laughing at the memory. I came on to him big time. After the show, we went to dinner and talked for hours. I sat across from this woman from Brooklyn who thought I was the most riveting person she had ever watched on a stage. The man who had spent the better part of a decade being told he was wrong in every direction suddenly felt for the first time like someone had looked at him and not wanted to look away. I would say later that I knew within 22 minutes of meeting her that she was the woman I wanted to spend my life with. Not a possibility. The woman, the only one. 2 weeks later, Rhea moved into my Manhattan apartment. 2 weeks. Not a month, not a careful courtship with dinners and second thoughts. Two people from similar worlds, working class roots, big ambitions, and the specific toughness that comes from never having had anything handed to them, looked at each other and recognized something they hadn't known they were looking for. We would live together for 11 years before getting married. Not because the commitment was uncertain, but because neither of us needed a piece of paper to understand what we already had. My relationship with Michael Douglas, maintained across those difficult early years, eventually led to the break that everything else would build on. In 1975, Michael, now a producer, was making One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, adapted from Ken Kesey's novel and directed by Milos Forman. He asked for me. Forman resisted at first. The studio wanted a bigger name. Michael held firm. I was cast as Martini, a psychiatric patient, a role I had actually played years earlier in a stage version of the same story. I was on screen for 5 minutes and 52 seconds. I left a mark that people are still describing. 50 years later, the film won 5 Academy Awards. I was not nominated, but I was finally on the map. People knew my face. They remembered the little guy who made them laugh and flinch at the same time. Then in 1978, I made a move everyone in Hollywood told me was professional suicide. I turned down 3 movie roles to audition for a television sitcom called Taxi. My own agent told me not to do it, but I had read the script and I knew the same way I had known when I met Rhea in my gut, immediately, without needing anyone's confirmation. The character was Louis De Palma, a dispatcher, mean, petty, and unapologetically awful in every direction. I walked into that audition and delivered a 7-minute monologue that left the room silent. ABC was nervous about my height. Creator James L. Brooks threatened to quit if they didn't cast me. They cast me. I signed the contract without negotiating, even though it paid 40% less than what the other actors were making. I didn't care. I knew this was the part I was supposed to play. In the second season of Taxi, Rhea joined the cast. She played Zena Sherman, Louis De Palma's girlfriend. The producers had no idea Danny and Rhea had been living together for years. They thought the chemistry was just exceptional acting. It was exceptional acting. It was also two people who knew each other the way very few human beings ever truly know another person, the way you know the sound of someone's breathing in the dark, the way you know what they're going to say before they open their mouth. In January of 1982, after 11 years together, we got married, quietly, without a production. No photographers, no statements, just us. That same year, Rhea began her role as Carla Tortelli on Cheers, the sharp, wisecracking barmaid who would make her one of the most beloved actresses on American television. She won 4 Emmy Awards for that role. I talked about those Emmys the way a man talks when the pride he feels is bigger than any award he ever won himself. Watching her work, watching the room light up when she walked into it, was one of the purest joys of my life. In 1983, working at nights and on weekends while still filming Taxi, we quietly started Jersey Films together. Over the next 2 decades, it became one of the most consequential independent production companies in American cinema, producing Pulp Fiction, Aaron Brockovich, Out of Sight, Garden State, and others. The Pulp Fiction story alone tells you something about how we operated. Quentin Tarantino had been turned down by other studios. Danny and his partners kept the project alive, gave Tarantino's company money and office space, and let him make his film on $8 million. He promised it would look like a $25 million movie. He kept that promise. We believed in the work more than we believed in the safe choice. We did all of this while raising 3 children. Lucy, born in 1983. Grace, born in 1985. Jacob, born in 1987. We kept a rule for decades. No more than 2 weeks would go by without us working on something creative together. Not performing a marriage, building something. The clearest picture of what that partnership looked like was Matilda in 1996. I directed, I played the awful Mr. Wormwood. I cast Rhea as his equally awful wife. We let our own children appear in small roles. But what audiences never saw was what was happening off camera. The young actress playing Matilda, Mara Wilson, was dealing with her mother's cancer during production. Rhea and I quietly became a shelter for her, caring for her the way you care for someone who belongs to you. Before filming was finished, I arranged for a near-final cut to be screened at the hospital so Mara's mother could see it before she passed. Mara Wilson would say years later that we felt like her favorite aunt and uncle, that we had made something unbearable, slightly more bearable in a way she never forgot. That was the part of the work that mattered most to me. The posters and the award nominations never quite captured it. The man who played monsters on screen was, in the quiet parts of his life, trying to be one of the good ones. Then, in October of 2012, after 30 years of marriage and more than 40 years together, Rhea and I announced our separation. The world reacted as though something had been taken from it, because in a Hollywood landscape full of relationships that lasted about as long as a press cycle, we had been proof for millions of ordinary people that something different was possible. Not a performed love story. Two real people from real places who had built a real life, and you could feel the difference. Rhea, speaking years later on Julia Louis-Dreyfus's podcast, Wiser Than Me, was honest without being detailed. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, she said. It was very difficult at first. There were a lot of reasons that we separated. She acknowledged that both of us were deeply ambitious, consumed by our work. He loves to work. I like to work, she said. Some things she made clear belonged to us and not to the public. But here is what did not happen. We did not divorce. By March of 2013, just 5 months after the announcement, a source close to both of us told People magazine, in the simplest possible terms, they love each other, always have and always will. We reconciled, we tried again. We went to therapy, 38 sessions by some accounts. I rented out the same restaurant where we had spent one of our early dates, and we sat at the same table for 4 more years. We were together again. We separated a second time in 2017, and still we did not divorce. When Rhea was asked by the New York Post in 2018 why we had never formally ended the marriage, her answer had the quality of someone who was past needing to dress things up. We've been together a very long time, so there's a lot of love and history, she said. We agree on enough things, so why ruin that with the yucky things that come with a divorce? I bought a house less than a mile from Rhea's. We talked every single day. We met regularly at the same restaurant, at the same table. Our son once noted that we shared a Netflix account and texted each other while watching the same shows from separate houses. When I spoke to Fox News Digital in 2024, someone asked about Rhea. I didn't pause. We're doing great, I said. We see each other all the time. Yesterday was Lucy's birthday. We were all together for the party. We're a tight family. Then I added the part that said more than the rest of it. You know, Rhea and I met in 1970. We've been together for that long, and you grow together. It's like you really know how each other's feeling all the time. We participate in conversation daily. That is not how you talk about someone you used to love. That is how you talk about someone you never stopped. In May of 2019, when Rhea appeared on Watch What Happens Live and Andy Cohen asked plainly whether she and I would ever divorce, she looked at him as if the question genuinely puzzled her. What for? She said. And in 2022, she said something that stopped a lot of people in their tracks. Sometimes I wish we were still together because those were the glory days, but these are other kinds of glory days. There is a whole philosophy of love inside that sentence if you sit with it long enough. In 2025, I finally began speaking publicly about Fairbanks disease in a way I never had before. Not for myself, but for the children who couldn't afford treatment, for the people living in daily pain with no one to speak for them. I had been donating quietly for years more than $12 million to fund bone condition research, none of it under my own name, none of it attached to a press release. I cared more about the outcome than the credit. Now, I was speaking, too, about the decades of pressure from Hollywood to look more physically typical, to agree to procedures that might make me easier for audiences to accept. Every single time the answer had been the same. I'd rather be a first-rate version of myself than a second-rate version of someone else. I had said it in my 20s, broke and sleeping in a Volkswagen. I was still saying it at 81. And the thread that runs through all of it, through the burn contract, and the 19 takes on a water slide with broken blood vessels in my eye, through the 12 million donated without my name attached, connects back to a woman who walked into a theater one January night, forgot the friend she had come to see, and could not look away from the stocky man on that small stage. She had seen me before any credentials existed. She had chosen me when the world was still busy telling me I was the wrong shape for the frame. She came on to me big time, she always said with a laugh, and she moved into my apartment 2 weeks later, and she never in any permanent sense left. At 81, I am still working, producing a sports documentary series for Prime Video with my son Jake and daughter Lucy. Still playing Frank Reynolds on It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, a show I joined in 2006 when it was struggling and have never left. I showed up when they needed me, and I stayed. That appears to be something I have always been very good at. Rhea and I still talk every day. We still have the same restaurant table. We are still legally, and in every way that seems to matter to both of us, husband and wife. Asked to describe what Rhea had meant to my life, I answered in the way I tend to answer the things that matter most, without reaching for anything grand. We have 3 beautiful children, and now we have grandchildren. The family's growing. We participate in conversation daily. No poetry, no sweeping declaration, just a man at 81 describing the shape of his daily life with the person he has known the longest in the plainest language he could find. Sometimes the plainest language is the truest kind. I was told at nearly every stage of my life that I was not enough. I refused to change. I burned contracts. I showed up in pain and never said why. I gave quietly and without applause. And the woman who had walked into a theater one night and thought I was the most interesting person in the room, she stayed too. Different house, same conversation every single day. Some things do not end just because the form they take changes. Some people find each other early and never fully let go. And the rest of the story, however long and difficult and strange it gets, is just what happens in between the finding. I found Rhea Perlman on the 17th of January, 1970. I have not stopped finding her since. And maybe that raises a question worth sitting with, not about us, but about the rest of you. Is staying, even in a form the world doesn't quite recognize as love, sometimes the most honest thing 2 people can do for each other?